Holy Gospel according to Matthew, the 25th chapter.
Glory to you, Lord.
Jesus said to the disciples, "For it is as if a man, going on a journey, summoned his slaves and entrusted his property to them. To the one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. The one who had received 5 talents went off at once and traded with them and made 5 more talents. In the same way, the one who had 2 talents made 2 more talents. But the one who had received the 1 talent went off and dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those slaves came and settled accounts with them. Then the one who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 more talents, saying, 'Master, you handed over to me 5 talents, and see, I have made 5 more talents.' His master said to him, 'Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master.' And the one with 2 talents also came forward, saying, 'Master, you handed me over to me 2 talents. See, I have made 2 more talents.' His master said to him, 'Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master.' Then the one who had received the 1 talent came forward, saying, 'Master, I knew that you were a harsh man, weeping where you did not sow, and gathering where you did not scatter seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here, have what is yours.' But the master replied, 'You wicked and lazy slave! You knew, did you, that I reap where I did not sow, and gather where I did not scatter? Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and on my return I would have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him, and give it to the one with 10 talents. For all those who have, more will be given, and they will have in abundance. But from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. As for this worthless slave, throw him into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth.'" The Gospel of our Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
The parable that Jesus tells us today isn't giving us financial advice. No, like a stockbroker would do, Jesus isn't trying to give us a lesson on how investing our money would help us receive a larger return. Instead, this parable is all about trust. Trust in God's abundance, and trusting that what God gives to us is to be used in a way that brings about more abundance. So what do I mean when I say the word abundance? Well, according to the dictionary's definition, the word abundance means an extremely plentiful or over-sufficient quantity or supply. But when I think of abundance, I imagine a never-ending fountain that continuously flows all day and all night. There is such a fountain that is found in the chapel at my seminary, the Lutheran School of Theology at Chicago. Their baptismal font is an ever-flowing fountain of water that splashes down into a small wading pool. I used to sit in the chapel and close my eyes and just listen to the sounds of the flowing water, sometimes for what seemed like hours. Or when I think of abundance, I often recall a great feast of food that I got to partake in. The kind of feast that has everything one's heart could desire, with enough of it for at least a second helping, maybe even a third. Most of us will experience such a type of feast this coming Thursday, as we celebrate the Thanksgiving holiday with our families and friends. in the slums of the Mexican city of Cuernavaca, an area that was called La Estacion. Now, in terms of having lots of plentiful quantity or supply, these people were far from living in abundance. All the families lived in extremely poor conditions. They lived in mere shacks that were broken down with no floor except the dirt under their feet and no glass windows. They had no clean water, no electricity, no heat. There was no plumbing. I don't even remember seeing any outhouses. There was garbage spread around everywhere, along with lots of wild dogs running around filled with disease. But the reason I think of these people when I think of abundance is because of how they were so willing to share all that they had with me. It didn't matter to them how poor they were, how much they had or didn't have. What mattered is that they showed me their guest, incredible hospitality, so that I always knew how welcome I was. Plus, even though they had so little according to our standards, they gave thanks to God for all that God had given them. And they gave thanks to God that they had someone to share it with. You see, this parable that Jesus tells us today is really about whether we trust in God's abundance or whether we want to continue living in the fear of scarcity. For the first two slaves, the one who was given 5 talents and the one who was given 2 talents, they trusted in God's abundance. So much so that they were willing to take what God had given them and go out and interact with people in order to trade with Him, so that they both doubled what was given to them. The third slave, however, did not trust in God's abundance and went and hid his talent where it could not be enjoyed by anyone. Now, in case you're wondering how much a talent is worth, I did some math here. I know that's surprising, but I did some math here and I figured it out. So a talent is considered a large sum of money that was usually worth 20 years' wages of the common worker. Now, according to the Social Security Administration, the average wage index for the American worker last year was $48,665. So if we were to go by that figure and take that amount times 20 years, a talent by today's standards would be worth $973,300. That means the one slave who received 5 talents was given the equivalent of $4,866,500. While the one slave who was given the 2 talents would have had the equivalent of $1,946,600. Needless to say, these slaves were given a lot of money to take care of for the master. Could you imagine being handed over $4.8 million to take care of for someone else? Or $1.9 million? Or even just this $973,000? What would you do with that money? Would you be willing to take a risk and invest it in order to try and double it? Trusting in the abundance of God? Or would you play it safe and hide it away, afraid that you might lose it all? It's funny to me that the one slave who was given the smallest amount was the one who was most afraid to take any risks with it. I say this because in my own experience, it seems that those who are given the least are the ones who seem to be the most generous with what they have. Yet this slave was the one who was afraid. And unfortunately, that fear of scarcity cost him to lose everything when all was said and done. But again, this parable isn't about investing money in stock markets or banks as opposed to just stuffing it under your mattress in your bedroom. This parable instead asks us the question, what will we do with what God has given us? You You see, Jesus used a large sum of money in his parable to make a point. To point out and make us understand that God indeed gives us so much. Everything we have comes from God. The wood that builds the frames of our homes and our furnitures, that comes from God. The sheep's wool and cotton plants that give us our clothing, it comes from God. The metals in the ground that are molded into such a way that we can have things like cars, copper wiring for electricity, and knives used to prepare food. All of it comes from God. But God also gives us the people in our lives. The people who love us and care for us. The people who share the burden of our labors at work. The people who enforce laws and help us to stay safe and hopefully help us to thrive in them. The people who know how to help us have fun. The people who will trade with us. Plus, God also gives us the church, a faith community that prays for us, that helps us to walk in faith, that reminds us of God's love and helps us to share the good news in the world. God gives us all of this, and so much more, an abundance beyond measure. But God also knows that there are so many who live in this broken world who do not know the joy of God's abundance, because they live in this fear of scarcity. For some of them, they have been forced to live in this fear due to unjust class and racial systems. They have to live in poverty, and they have no understanding of this abundance as they try to do their best to live from day to day. For some, it is the fear of never having enough, due to the consumerist voices that tell us we won't be happy until we have this and that, this and that. Just watch the insanity of thousands of people who will stand outside stores like Target and Walmart on this coming Thanksgiving night, just so they can push and shove each other around as they fight to get the best deal on toys, gadgets, and other things that the commercials say we need to be happy or need to do to give the perfect gift. And still for others, it is this thinking that what we have earned belongs only to us, that we pulled ourselves up by our own bootstraps, that we worked hard to get what we have. Why should we share it? Of course, this attitude comes forgetting that nothing really ever belongs to us, because all of it truly belongs to God. And one day the Master will return to collect what belongs to him. All of this falls under that umbrella, the fear of scarcity, the fear that there is never enough. But if we have ever needed proof that God gives us abundance, that God indeed wipes out this fear of scarcity, that God ensures that we have all, that God ensures that we will have all that we will ever want or need, then all we need to do is look around this room, to look again to the cross that hangs in the front of our sanctuary, or the baptismal font that is never empty, or the table each week where there is always the food of life, enough for everyone to get some. We look to the cross and we remember that Jesus gave up his own life for us out of an abundance of love for us, so that we would come to know that death cannot claim us anymore. For in his resurrection, Jesus showed us that we have been given an abundance of eternal life, an ever-flowing life that will never run out. And when we look to the font, we are reminded that each and every day God gives us an abundance of forgiveness that washes away any fear of scarcity, so that our hearts can grow to trust that we don't have to keep what God gives us to ourselves, but we can take a risk. We can share it with others so that the abundance of God may grow in the broken world. 5 talents become 10. 2 talents become 4. And when we come to the table, we get to taste the sweet abundance of the never-ending feast of the food of life and the cup of salvation. And as we eat it, we are filled with the abundance of Jesus, who transforms us into the generous givers, who are always thankful for what we have and are willing to share it, because there is no greater sign of love and hospitality than to share what we have with a stranger who has become a guest, just as Jesus does for us each week, inviting us to the table as guests. You know, sometimes God gives us so much for our life, so much to share so that others can have life. Let us be the church that trusts in God's abundance and promises to share with those who are in need here in this place, here in our community, and in the world. And if you are still unsure of what you can give, for the fear of scarcity is a strong one to overcome, just remember that we are children of the light, and that God will continue to bring us the means of grace to help us grow in trust and faith, that God will always provide. We will see one of those amazing means of grace in just a few moments, when we have two children, not just one, but two children, Archer and Bryn, come to the font to be welcomed into God's family, to be washed with the waters of baptism as Christ brings them the gift of becoming children of God, gives them the gift of the Holy Spirit, and the gift of an abundant faith community who will help them grow in their faith. So let's take a risk. For God will always provide. Let us take a leap of faith, for God promises our abundance will always be there. And let us trust that God will use us to share that abundance with the world, so that more abundance can be created. After all, just remember that we are made in God's image. The essence of our beings is God's beloved child, and God is always generous. For God gives us everything. Gift of forgiveness, gift of healing, the gift of new and abundant life. God gives it simply because God can, because God loves us, because God wants us to thrive and have abundance. So let us be generous like God. Let us share that abundance so that the whole world